Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And today, surprise, surprise, I want to talk a little bit more about the next Switch, the Switch 2, the Switch Pro, the Super Switch, the new Nintendo Switch, the Switch Plus, all of these different names that the internet has applied to this concept of Nintendo's next Switch hardware or next gen console, which you've heard me discuss in the past. Whatever this thing turns out to be, and whenever we actually see it, the conversation persists. And obviously, nothing is confirmed, and everyone has been talking about more Switch Pro stuff because of apparent leaks from the last week, and it really just turned out that Nintendo was revealing a new Splatoon 3 skinned version of the Switch OLED, but still people are talking about Switch Pro stuff, and a lot of people are upset that the conversation persists, and I understand that because in some ways it can be frustrating, but in other ways I kind of don't care because it's just an interesting topic. And for 2 years, you guys have been hearing me sometimes talk about Switch Pro. That was more over a year ago that I was talking Switch Pro, and I've really doubled down and committed to the idea of a Switch 2 or a next-gen Nintendo console coming sometime next year. And so I obviously have still seen value in the conversation, and Nintendo being my favorite company, of course I'm interested in what they're going to do next. And I feel like where we are in the middle of 2022, in the middle of the 6th year of the Switch's life, of course it's time to start considering what's going to happen and look ahead to the near future. That's always interesting. And so if you've been following me for a while, you know that's something I like to do every once in a while is really directly interact with you guys and give you guys a voice and give you shout outs on videos by either probing you guys for questions on Twitter, just random Q&A questions, or more recently, I like to ask you for specific answers on a specific topic so I can cherry pick a couple of them and discuss your responses in a video and give you a shout out. And that is what we're doing today, because I asked you guys what you want to see from Nintendo's next hardware reveal. When do you want to see it? Do you want it to be hybrid? Do you want them to change it up? Do you want specific franchises? Do you care about big power jumps? Do you not care about big power jumps or pig power jumps? Whatever the heck I'm trying to say here. You know, I just asked you for your thoughts and what you think and expect and desire, and I got a ton of answers, way more than I was expecting, at least as far as how quickly they came in. Within 5-10 hours I just had like 70 responses or whatever. And so I picked a few, and I want to read them and discuss my thoughts on your answers today. Quick reminder, if you want to be a part of these in the future, you've got to follow me on YouTube and subscribe to the channel, and you have to follow me on Twitter. I'm very active. I do this stuff all the time. I love interacting with you and giving you shout outs and giving you guys a voice on the channel here. I think it's a ton of fun, and you guys really seem to like it. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into your guys' desires for the next Nintendo hardware reveal. First tweet comes from Daddy Who Games at Daddy Who Games, who says, as a 40-year-old gamer introducing his kids to gaming, I have zero interest in hardware specs. So many games have the pitch of, quote, best graphics and immersion on the current generation. Nintendo, barring their Mario sports titles, makes the best gameplay loops. Let it continue. So, obviously, in a way I relate to this because I myself am turning 42 this coming weekend. You say you're a 40-year-old gamer and a 40-year-old dad, so we're clearly the same age group, so I appreciate that. I'm not a dad. I will never be a dad, no interest. So I don't have the perspective of sharing gaming with my children, but we're clearly the same generation, and your big thing that you point out is that you have zero interest in hardware specs. I find that interesting. In some ways, I understand, and there are times where I agree, where it's like, I don't necessarily always need gaming to be the most powerful, best-looking, best thing ever. I don't always need it to be, like, changing the game. But also, this last generation, and especially this last 2 years, I think I've really learned that, you know what? I love the Switch, and I love it as it is, but at the same time, seeing where the industry has started to go, I can't lie to myself and tell myself that I haven't gotten more interested than ever in seeing where graphics and particle effects and lighting and just all things visual, the size and scope of games and game worlds. I really want to see where that goes. And I've also really learned to appreciate super high fidelity, whether it's like super impressive anti-aliasing or actual 4K or whatever it is, and really consistent high frame rates. I've always obviously loved and appreciated that, going back to the original Metroid Prime, my favorite game ever. But for some reason, I think when comparing the Switch to PS5 and Series X, that's when I was like, man, I really need these better frame rates, you know? And that's something that I think Nintendo is lacking. So hardware specs, I appreciate the idea of not caring about them, especially if you're focusing on showing the games to your kids where they're not really going to be able to discern the difference anyway. But for me, somebody going back to gaming in the 80s on the Atari 2600 and the NES and the Sega Master System, I've kind of grown to appreciate over the past few years really what technology and gaming can be capable of. And I would like to see Nintendo step up to something more modern. The Switch, I think, is showing its age. The Switch OLED didn't do anything to change that. We need a new jump, just in my opinion. You can disagree, and that's fine. And so that's what I feel. So I appreciate your comment. They do make the best gameplay loops. Obviously, their gameplay is king, and it does trump power and graphics. Absolutely. So I should add that amendment here. Gameplay is always more important than visuals, without question. But I also think you can have both. And Nintendo is always going to make great games no matter what power their current console gives us. So why not just take their great gameplay and development and add more power to it? It seems like a win for everybody. Next tweet comes from a good friend of mine and a fellow YouTuber, Parker Deal at Parker Deal, who also helps run the channel Redirect, which is a great channel, and I cannot recommend it enough to you if you're a Nintendo fan. They do great stuff over there. And he had some things to say, so I wanted to give him a shout out and mention what his tweet said. So he says, several gimmies and an essential. More powerful, still hybrid, handheld and home console markets are really important, and great games. But the essential is backwards compatibility. Continue the growth of services and make sure game purchases carry over. I do agree with that one. He goes on to say the reason the Virtual Console never came back was to avoid a reset every generation. I don't entirely agree with that, but he continues, and if they continue to grow the service as well, this will have been worth the extended wait to eventually see GameCube games all accessible, etc. Boy, I do want GameCube games on my Switch and Nintendo platforms again. So, what's worth pointing out about Parker's comment is he encompasses the majority of a lot of the sentiments that I saw in my responses. I want to let you guys know that the vast majority of people who responded said a couple of things. The main thing everyone said was to stay hybrid. I think almost no one said that they wanted them to go away from the hybrid concept. Everyone of like the 100 answers or whatever I saw was like hybrid, keep doing the same, don't change. Everyone almost entirely said that. And then also backwards compatibility came up a lot, as Parker also points out. And that's one I for sure agree with. So what does he say? More powerful, but still hybrid. Again, I just said everyone said to stay hybrid, and I ultimately agree with that. I do miss and appreciate that Nintendo has always been a company that innovates and changes and keeps us on our toes and adds things to the gaming space and the way we interact with our games and game consoles, and that's always been their strongest quality. And the Switch was a version of that. But at the same time, I feel like specifically with this change into the current generation of Switch and power into the next generation of whatever Nintendo's going to do, this is one of the few times where I think sticking with this concept is the best call. Stay hybrid. It worked for the Switch. It'll work at least one more generation. I think it has one more full generation of super strong success in it. By the end of their next generation, if they give us a Switch 2 or whatever they do, that's when I think the steam might have run out of the tank, or the gas would have run out of the tank, and maybe Nintendo's going to have to change it up again that time. But at least from this generation to next, I think sticking with hybrid as the overall big concept is probably the smartest call. It does get tricky because now their idea has been knocked off and other companies are doing it very well, like Steam Deck is the ideal example here. So Nintendo loses some of the uniqueness of the Switch going into the next generation, but I still think they can make it work again. And, Parker does say more powerful, so that's the other thing, Part of this big question I posed to you guys is, do you even desire more power? Are you looking for Switch 2 and next-gen power that's more on par with PS5 and Series X? Or do you just want this marginal Pro upgrade that doesn't really add a whole lot, but maybe makes it 4K with 60 frames per second? Which to me is only a half step. And, because a lot of people seem more focused on Switch Pro than they do on Switch 2. And so Parker basically doubles down on what I agree with. More power to me is key and very, very important. The last thing I'll touch on, He talks about the virtual console not returning to avoid a reset. The reason I disagree with that is because I will say that maybe that is the reason Nintendo did it, but I think that that's wrong of Nintendo, and I think it's the wrong thing to expect Nintendo to do. What Nintendo should do is Virtual Console should keep going from Wii to Wii U to Switch to 3DS to next to next to next, and everything you buy should just roll over. Microsoft and Sony and obviously Steam and PC platforms have a version of what you've bought on prior generations can roll over. A lot of the stuff I purchased digitally on my Xbox One, I can re-download on my Series X, and I have done that. Nintendo should have allowed the same. Everything I bought on my Wii U Virtual Console or my Wii before it, I should still be able to re-download and play on my current Switch, but I can't. So that's the one thing I want to say. Nintendo, I think, needs to be better about that stuff. Next up comes a tweet from Tristan at TristyChan, who says the Switch 2 should have two models. One being a hybrid like the current Switch, and one being a home console-only device. They could save money by not having to make a screen, and maybe make something more powerful since it's dedicated for home use. So, this one's tricky to me, and it's interesting. Like, it's not a crazy concept, and, you know, all of these different companies, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, have had scenarios where they have more than one model of the same hardware on the market, and they allow you to choose based on the price you want to spend for the features and power or whatever you get out of it. And that even includes the Switch, because there's a Switch Lite, a regular Switch, and a Switch OLED, right? They've done it with the 3DS. Microsoft did it with the first 360s. Actually, I don't know if Sony ever did it other than going to slimmer and slimmer models. So maybe... Oh, that's not true. They have a discless and a disc-only version of the PS5 or whatever. So it's not a crazy thought, and maybe this would work in Nintendo's favor going forward. But I'm somebody who just doesn't really care about this. And so here's the thing. Maybe what I care about doesn't matter, right? Because it's about the market. And I think what you're trying to say is they should just launch the next generation with the same concept that Nintendo eventually did with the Switch Lite, where once the Switch Lite was released, 2 years after the Switch launched, there was the dockable and the undockable handheld-only version, right? Both options existed based on what you want to pay. Trista is saying they should basically do that from the jump of the next generation. If they're sticking with hybrid, and if they really want to push the concept of their handheld gaming console quality is still part of their business model, maybe this does actually make a lot of sense. To me, I guess the reason it doesn't initially get me excited is because if they do that, the handheld version is no longer even existing in my brain. It's like I have such tunnel vision for the home console only version that's going to be probably more powerful with better graphics and better capabilities. It just makes the most sense to me, and especially if they find a way to still make it backwards compatible, which wouldn't be impossible. Think of a new console from Nintendo that only connects to your TV, just like a GameCube, just like a PS2 or a PS5 or a 360. It just connects to your TV, and you put in games for it, and it's as powerful as a PS5 or close to PS5 maybe. But it also has a little place for Switch cartridge slots. I mean, that's possible, right? I mean, maybe some features like things that use touchscreens like a Mario Party probably couldn't work, but they already have that problem with Switch Lite and things that use Joy-Cons. So, I don't know. I guess the whole thing to me is if I'm given an option, I'm going home console only. I don't really care about the handheld stuff. It's nice, but I don't need it if I could get more powerful out of a regular console. So that's just what I think. But to your credit, Tristan, this might be a smart model if they decide to do it. Next up comes a tweet from Yadel, if I'm saying that correctly, at Yadsby, who says, just backwards compatibility with cartridges, digital, and peripherals. Better battery and screen, it can stay 720p. So, I don't mean to pick on you, Yadel, but the reason I chose this tweet, thank goodness I saw it out of the 80 or whatever, I was scrolling through, or 100, whatever. The reason I chose this one is because this is one that, to me, I don't agree with at all, and I think it seems to clash with what most other people say they want as well. Because you seem very comfortable sacrificing any significant changes. Backwards compatibility, obviously important. A new Switch device that still plays regular Switch games, that's obvious. And, you know, digital and and still works with Joy-Cons and whatever. But you really just say you want a better battery and screen, but it can stay 720. You don't even care about 1080, let alone 4K. And you just want it to be a regular Switch. To me, it basically sounds like all you want is the Switch Pro. All you want is the Switch equivalent of what the new Nintendo 3DS was, which was almost nothing and had like 2 exclusive games to it that barely even took advantage of what it could do anyway. And I will say that it's totally fine if this is what you want. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer for what everyone desires, but I'm just going to share with you my opinion when comparing it to your opinion. And my opinion is that I want way, way, way more than this for the next Switch reveal, the next generation, whatever they do. Even if they make a Switch Pro, I've said this for 2 years as well, if it's powerful enough to play games that are close to PS5 and Series X, games that couldn't run on the regular Switch, to me, it's next generation, even if they don't call it Switch 2. It's just going to be because the power jump will be next generation. And so you seem very comfortable with what the Switch is currently. You don't need better resolution. I'm going to assume you don't really care about frame rates either. That's totally fine, and you're right to feel that way, but I disagree. I desire much more from their next console, and I think most other people do too. So I guess only time will tell. Next up comes a tweet from Anchor Down Gaming, who is a very regular responder and someone who interacts with me a lot on Twitter, so I appreciate your response. What's up, man? Who says, keep it hybrid, 60 frames per second, 1440p, 4K when docked, and most importantly, I want a good UI and online infrastructure when playing with friends. Party chat and all that stuff. I want it to feel like an Xbox/PlayStation system, but it's Nintendo. So this is overall, I think, a great breakdown and very, very close to what I want, and I think what a lot of people want. Staying hybrid, again, I don't need them to stay hybrid, but is it smart for their business? Yeah, probably. Are they going to stay hybrid? Yeah, probably. And as long as it moves itself into next generation in terms of power and output and frame rate, I'm fine with it staying hybrid. So that makes sense and is in line with a lot of people. 60 frames per second, 1440p portably, and 4K when docked. I love it. That works perfectly for me. That's a great breakdown. Yes, please. And then you mentioned wanting basically more modern features and functionality out of the UI, better online infrastructure, party chats, probably simpler things like themes and folders from the get-go, I would guess. All these different things that makes it... You say you want it to feel like an Xbox or PlayStation, but Nintendo. I think what you mean, which is more what I would agree with, is that it feels modern like Xbox and PlayStation, but it has that Nintendo charm to it, right? I don't want Nintendo to copy the other platforms. Nintendo is best when they're unique and they stand out, even though they all compete together. And I think that's even kind of what you're saying, but your wording felt a little bit awkward to me. But yeah, I agree too. Here's the thing. I wouldn't even use most of those features, but there's no doubt that Nintendo has set themselves apart in a bad way and set themselves behind the curve by not being up to par with their online infrastructure, their party chats, the way they have you deal with your friends and play and communicate with your friends, even losing the virtual console and the way the eShop is set up. They're very behind the times with a lot of that stuff. Now, I don't need a complicated UI. I like the simplicity of the Switch's UI. Things like themes and folders are fine, but I do think that your infrastructure improvement is definitely what they need. So overall, I really like what you're saying here. Next up comes a tweet from Saeed Haider at Hade023, who says pretty much what they were doing this gen, but more power, more games, etc. One suggestion I have is making more wacky experimental games like the old days. They did a few this generation, but I'd love to see more. So this is great because you do the same thing that a lot of people say. You just want it to stay basically a Switch, but just add more power and more games and yada yada. But I like how you bring up the wacky experimental games like the old days. They did do that a few times with games this generation. Like 1-2 Switch, whether you like it or not, you could argue kind of is that. And anything that kind of tried to use the Joy-Cons in a unique way is kind of doing that. But in general, I agree with you, man. I think of the Nintendo from the 64, GameCube, Wii, and Wii U generations, those 4 generations, whether it's the hardware they were doing crazy things with, like the Wii Remote and the gamepad, or just their game development on the 64 and GameCube where it seems like they tried crazier ideas, I agree with you. That's the kind of Nintendo I still miss, and I think part of it's still alive in the Switch generation, but I think we've also lost a lot of it with the loss of Iwata, and now with Reggie leaving the company and Miyamoto stepping away from game development. We do have Koizumi, and we do have Aonuma running the Zelda scenario, but yeah, I think the personnel running Nintendo changing so much means a lot of the wackier, more creative and innovative side of Nintendo is probably gone for a long time. And that doesn't mean they still won't make great games and great hardware, but I think the wackier experimental stuff that you and I like, we've lost in many ways. Okay, so they did the Nintendo Labo, which is something we can't take away. Nintendo Labo didn't appeal to me, but that was very innovative and an interesting idea. The Mario Kart Circuit AR thing that's just a toy to me. That one doesn't really count in my opinion, but so yeah, I don't know. Interesting stuff. I guess we'll see if Nintendo kind of brings back some of their goofier sides. Okay, 2 more to go here. Next one comes from Evan Dittmar at Evan Dittmar1, who says, I don't want a hardware reveal until next year, and I want it to be next gen. A Switch Pro wouldn't help much because the games will still have to be playable on the original Switch. This, to me, is basically the perfect comment and the perfect summation. Because you don't want the reveal until next year. That's when I think it's going to happen. You don't want a Switch Pro because it's going to be limited by still having to play regular Switch games. That is 100% what I've felt for 2 years. I mean, the naming of Switch Pro is different because, like I said, they could make a Switch Pro, but if it's next generation in terms of games and power, then it doesn't matter. But when you say Switch Pro, you just mean the idea of a marginal upgrade that doesn't go next gen. And I agree with you completely. Next year, I think, is the year to see their big new hardware reveal, whatever it is, see if I'm right or wrong in my predictions. And it can't be just a marginal upgrade because it will be limited by the 2017 tech of the Switch. And just like Evan says, it's going to have to still play games for that console. It can't play exclusive games. And I do think that will likely hold it back. So, Evan, I mostly agree with everything you're saying here, man. Last comment comes from Mentalium San Bayonetta, I hope I said that right, who says 3 things. 1, more powerful to get third-party support easier. 2, a decent battery life. 3, backwards compatible with current Switch. I can't imagine it being 4K, but at least on par with an Xbox Series S. So essentially Switch 2 like you've already speculated. So another comment, I think there were 3 that I focused on here that very much fell in line with my personal desires and predictions and beliefs. And for the most part, I think Mentalium here is really correct. I mean, I've said many times that one of the big benefits for Nintendo going next gen in power is for third-party support. Yes, they survived greatly on their first-party stuff, and we know that, but they still care about third-party support. They need to. The third-party gaming companies, indie and AAA, are part of the lifeblood of the entire industry. And if you want your platform to succeed and have a good library, you need to make it open and welcome to those games. And when a new Call of Duty or a new Grand Theft Auto or a new anything else comes out, you want it to be on PS5, Series X, and also the Switch 2 or the Switch whatever Nintendo is making. We want those games. We want some of the differences to be present on the Switch version, but we still want Nintendo to get those games. The next Doom game, well, maybe not because it's Bethesda, but you guys know what I'm saying, right? These games need to be available. So the jump in power is part of why I've been saying that for a while now and predicting it. Battery life, obviously backwards compatible. Yes, that becomes the best solution for Nintendo going next gen. And so, yeah, making it on par with the Series S, like a Switch 2 like I've speculated, yeah, that's how I feel. So this was a ton of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Talk about all these answers below. With that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule 2 Review. I will catch you next time on another video. Bye-bye.